When I was retained by the Cascio family, the first thing I did was have each of the 5 siblings give me sworn testimony on video. I ended up with 10 hours of testimony detailing the horrific abuse they suffered at the hands of Michael Jackson.
Hi, my name is Frank Cascio, and I'm willing and more than willing to work on this project with Mrs. Jackson. Gee, it all started when I was 4 years old. My father was the general manager of the VIP suites at the Hemsley Palace in New York City. So he had a pretty high position at the Hemsley Palace. So one day my father tells me he's going to take me to work with him, and he's going to introduce me to a friend of his, and his friend happened to be a guy named Michael Jackson. And mind you, I'm 4, I have no idea who Michael Jackson is. I'm just happy to get out of the house and go to New York with my father and spend time with him. We get to the hotel. We go to some suite where we meet a gentleman by the name of Bill Bray. Now, Bill Bray is a gentleman who worked with Michael, was like a father figure to Michael, and who happened to be, really good friends with my father. From, what I can see, they greeted him. And so before I know it, Bill takes us to a room, and there's a guy sitting in a chair with his sunglasses on, and Bill goes, "Hey, Joker, we have Dominic and his son here to see you." So Michael gets up and takes off his glasses and says, "Hi, I'm Michael." And I say, "Hi, I'm Frank. Nice to meet you." And before we know it, we just start talking about cartoons and Garbage Pail Kids, and he's so interested in what I liked as a kid, what cartoons I liked, what toys, what music. And again, I have no idea. This is Michael Jackson, this huge superstar. To me, it's just like, wow, this guy really knows what he's talking about. So, I remember just taking my toy car, like driving it over his head, or he would like pretend like it's an airplane, and that's how I met Michael. We spoke, and we spent like an hour with him that day. And I remember driving back from the hotel with my father, and he said, "I don't think you realize who you just met right now." And I said, "No, I probably don't know who I just met. But who is he? He's so nice. He knew about cartoons. Like, what does he do?" And he said, "Oh, he's a famous singer." So before I know it, this man would randomly start showing up at our house in New Jersey, knocking on the door, and he'd come see us and wake us up in the middle of the night, or every time he would come to New York, we would go see him in the hotel and spend time with him. And every time he was in town, he would always come and visit my family, and that was just Michael. He was just part of the family, and the rest is history. It really is. It's interesting how I found out who he was. We went to a concert with the family, and I was a kid, and we're watching the show, and I thought it was incredible, and I turned to my father and I say, "Is that the same Michael Jackson who comes to our house on stage?" And that was the first time I realized that Michael was this big, huge entertainer who was absolutely incredible. But it didn't change my perception of him. It's just, he was just Michael to me. And because even off stage, he was Michael. He wasn't the king of pop or this big superstar. It was, someone you hang out with, talk to, and to share like comic books and have great conversation as you would with a kid. And I think that's one of the reasons why our friendship and our relationship to over 25 years is because myself or anyone in my family didn't look at him as Michael Jackson, this big superstar. We looked at him as Michael, one of the family, and he loved that. He loved that because everyone around him looks at him like he's the king of pop, Michael Jackson, superstar. And I understood later in life that, being that celebrity, being who he was, everybody wants something from him. They see dollar signs around him. So for us, one thing that we could give him is unconditional love and normality, and we can bring that to his life. And that's, I think, the reason why our relationship and this family bond has been created for over 25 years.
But he has a family of his own.
He does.
A large family.
And he loves his family.
So could you explain why there needed to be the existing other family dynamic which happened between?
I don't know. I think, he, with his family, growing up with them, he was always working. But for him, and don't get me wrong, my family would never ever take the place of his family. It's not possible, and nor would we try to or want to. But we created a family bond with him that he got from us because we weren't in the spotlight. We weren't, big celebrities. We were just normal people who happened to, be there for him and love him for who he was. And I think there's things that my family could give him, and he took, where his family at times couldn't be there for him in those certain situations. It's almost, I think it's human nature. It's almost like you're too close to home, and you almost talk to your best friends and your good friends sometimes before you even talk to your family. I know I do. And I just think there's certain things that we could give him, and we gave him, that, for instance, they were Jehovah's Witnesses. They didn't celebrate Christmases, birthdays, or anything. And he wanted that. He wanted to have that family, Thanksgiving, Christmas, and we did that with him. We celebrated almost every Christmas and Thanksgiving, birthdays, and things that in the Jehovah's Witness they don't believe in. But there's nothing wrong with that. He loved his mother, Catherine, to death. Like, he thought she was an angel, like, here on earth. And, he would get mad at us, if we would ever get mad at my mother, or, hear us yell back. He goes, "Don't you ever talk down to your mother or talk back to your mother. You have no idea who she was." And he really instilled in me to love and respect your mother and your father and your family.
What was your relationship like with Michael? What was the dynamic between you?
Jeez, it was like, it started, we had different phases in our relationship. It started when, obviously I was 4, and it was, almost, as the relationship evolved, it was almost like father, son, brothers, mentor. It had all the different aspects of a relationship. Growing up, he was, I always say this, he was the greatest teacher in the world. And
What did he teach you?
Everything. He was the most educated person I've ever met. And, he's given me an opportunity to travel the world and understand the different cultures and people around the world at such a young age, where you're in a small little suburban town and all you see is this. but then he opened up where there's a whole world beyond where you just live, and it expanded my brain and my thought process to not see this, but see everything, the world, as an entirety, understanding that anything is possible. Whatever you dream, you think of, you can conceive it. And I'm so grateful for my parents and for Michael, and even for my parents to understand the education and the opportunity that we would be getting by traveling and experiencing. And my parents loved Michael, and they knew he was such a good influence on us. Michael made us as kids better children, and he made us better people. Growing up, I didn't like to read, and he opened up my world to reading and understanding. He said, well, you're not going to read, you're going to be a bum for the rest of your life. So he goes, you want to be incredible in this world? You have to read. You have to start training. He would call it training. So he would be on tour, we'd be on the Danger Store. He'd be performing, all night long, and we'd come back, and it's like, all right, we're going to sit down and read. So here you have this man on stage performing day in and day out. But when he came back off stage and we're back in the hotel, we would order food, and it's like he'd help us with our homework if we had homework to do, and he'd be like our tutor when we were on tour with him. And then we would read. He would one of the first books he introduced me to was a book called Jonathan Livingston Seagull. And that book, he would give us a chapter, he would read to us, we'd sit around, and he'd be sitting in the chair reading this book. And this book was about a seagull who wanted to know more in life, knew that there was more than just what it is today, and just striving when everyone told him, you're just a seagull, this is what you have to do, you can only fly at this level, you can only eat this. And this is a seagull who wanted more and more and more. And this is a book that changed my life, and I think this is a book that Michael also was the Jonathan Livingston Seagull within himself, where he wanted more and more, and he knew there was more to this world than just what we're doing. He knew there was more to this world than just singing a regular song. He knew there was more than just, all right, performing, every day. He wanted to be the best. And one of his biggest lessons was, if you're going to do anything in this life, no matter what it is, you can sweep the floors in a school, but be the best janitor in the world. You can be a pilot, but be the best pilot in the world. You want to be a music producer, be the best at it. Master your craft. Do everything in your power to be the best at it. Put everything into it. And that's what he did with himself and his career and his life. And not only be the best at it, but it all revolved around love. Do everything from a place of love, with the right motives, right intentions. And today, no matter what I do, I hear his echo, be the best, be the best. Just, there is nobody who had the duration for over 25 years. There were spurts where, somebody would, hang out, and then, they wouldn't be around, and then there would be someone else, then they wouldn't be around. So, but it didn't mean that, he wasn't close to them. He loved Macaulay. He loved, his friends. And I wouldn't say it was a group of boys around. It wasn't like that. He had his friends and the families around their friends. And it wasn't just me. It was my family, my mother, my sister. No, and we kept it, very
Quiet, right.
And we respected it, and we weren't out there, promoting, and like he would be at our house for months at a time, and nobody would even know. And he would he's when he met everyone in our family, and he was open. We'd have Thanksgiving dinners like with 20, 30 people of friends and family at the house, and he would just sit right at the table and fit right in. It was just we treated him like he was Michael.
What do you have to say about that, the way the media sort of wrote stories that he was with boys all the time, and there was something wrong with the relationship, being one of those boys that was actually?
Well, Sonia, this is probably one of the main reasons why I wrote this book, was to put all those misconceptions and put them to rest. And I was sick and tired of people writing books as they were his best friend, or writing books and where they're experts in Michael, where they've never even met this man. And yeah, from the outside looking in, how the media portrayed him and his love for children, they took something so pure and innocent, because Michael was so motivated and inspired, and he was sincerely sensitive to a child in need when they were in their deathbeds. He couldn't understand, why this little kid in a hospital had cancer and only had 1 month to live. And that's another thing, when every time we went on the road, anywhere we went, he made sure we went to children's orphanages, children's hospitals, for us to see how fortunate we are as human beings and people. And there's not a time where he would leave a children's hospital and seeing these kids, and he would just break down and start crying, and he'd get so sensitive to it. There wasn't a facade. Michael sincerely loved children for who they were and the inspiration that he brought them. And when he saw a child suffering, he broke down. He wanted to do everything in his power to help them. This was real. This was not anything else but pure sincerity and his love for children. Michael was not a child molester. Michael has zero interest in touching children. It's disgusting, and I'm so disgusted when the media portrays him like this, where they take something so pure and innocent and try to make it ugly. He is zero. He's just not interested in hurting a child. He would rather cut his own wrist than hurt a child.
In your book, you mentioned that, when you heard about the Jordan Chandler incident, you couldn't imagine Michael as a molester, nor could you imagine Jordy making such an accusation.
No, I couldn't. I met Jordy multiple times, and he seemed like a really nice kid. Like, there was nothing, he seemed really nice. I met his mother June and his sister, and I remember we were at Neverland one time, and my brother and I wanted to stay in Michael's room, and asked, why isn't Jordy stay? Because we're all hanging out, talking, like watching movies, and it's like, well, I don't know. I never, if he wants to come, he's more than welcome. But Michael never once, not once, ever invited a child to stay in his room. Not once did he say, why don't you stay with me tonight? Not once. Not once. The kids, I know myself, we wanted to stay with him. We wanted to be around him. He was like Willy Wonka and the chocolate. We just, wanted to be around him. He had this energy, this aura that you just, you just want to be around him, because he makes you happy, he motivates you. He was such a beautiful person and such a light, and someone that you just want to be around.
So when you read those headlines for the first time and you knew it was Jordan Chandler, what did you think?
Well, I remember I was in New Jersey, and I walked into the laundry room, and I see my mother ironing, and I see like tears running down her eyes, and just, someone's upset, they iron even harder, and like, what's wrong? And she just starts ironing. Michael's in trouble. She's just ironing. Like, what do you mean Michael's in trouble? Because have you ever heard of a boy named Jordy Chandler? I said, yeah, Jordy's a really nice kid. Well, he's accusing Michael of child molestation. Like, what's child molestation? And she tells me something. She's like, has Michael ever, done anything inappropriate to you or touched you? I'm like, are you kidding? Like, absolutely not. And she's like, well, we have to help him. We have to be there for him. And, when that very day when that hit, we called and reached out to him. He was on tour somewhere, on the Dangerous tour. And, my family, we knew